Hello and welcome. The Jeffrey Epstein case, it's about so much more than just one man's horrific crimes. It's really a story about power. A story about how that power can be used to silence hundreds of people and, frankly, bend an entire system to its will. So today, we're going to unpack that. We're going to look at how a carefully built story can be used to erase the truth, and how a network of influence can keep that false story alive. So let's start with a question that really gets to the heart of things. Imagine for a second that your life is a storybook. It's filled with all your memories, your experiences, everything that makes you, you. Now, what happens when someone just takes that book, rips out the pages, and writes their own version? Really, what happens when your story is stolen from you? Because when someone's story is silenced or twisted, it's not just about changing a few facts. It's an attack on who they are. It's kind of like telling someone who survived a hurricane that the storm never happened, that their memories are wrong and their experiences just don't matter. It's an attempt to completely erase their reality. And that's exactly what the Epstein scandal was. It was a war of stories, fought for decades. You had this huge battle between two completely opposite narratives. It was a clash between the powerful and the powerless, a fight for whose version of the truth would be the one that stuck. On one side of this war, you had the deeply personal stories of hundreds of survivors. And we're not just talking about headlines here. These were intimate accounts of trauma and abuse that were systematically buried for years. Because, as one text puts it so perfectly, there is nothing more intimate to us than the story of our lives. And then, on the other side, there was Epstein's story. A carefully, meticulously crafted public image. A story so powerful it literally overwrote and silenced hundreds of others. He wasn't just some rich guy, no. He was sold as a brilliant financer, a connector of great minds, a philanthropist, a friend to the rich and the powerful. And that was the story the world was told. And for a very long time, it's the story the world believed. So you gotta ask, how did one man's story become so dominant? How was this narrative built and kept alive for so long, especially with so many other truths trying to get out? Well, the first pillar of this whole construction was an absolutely extraordinary network of influence. This right here is a perfect illustration of how Epstein projected power. Look at it. His massive Manhattan home wasn't just a place to live. It was a stage. It was a backdrop. By hosting these exclusive get-togethers for the elite, he created this aura of untouchable wealth and access. The building itself was part of the story, a giant symbol of his influence. Now, a key player in building the stage was a man named John Brockman. His Edge network was the perfect platform for Epstein. See, it wasn't just about money. It was about something you might call intellectual clout. By mixing billionaires with Nobel Prize-winning scientists, artists, and writers, Edge created this halo of legitimacy and genius that Epstein could just wrap himself in. And Epstein wasn't just showing up to these parties. He was paying for them. In fact, he was by far Edge's biggest donor, putting in more than $638,000 between 2001 and 2015. You have to understand, that's not just a donation. That's an investment in your own story, a way to buy a starring role in this exclusive club and guarantee your seat at the table. And boy, did that investment pay off. It gave him direct, continued access to some of the most famous billionaires and powerful people on the planet, long after he'd already served time for sex offenses. Every single dinner party, every conversation, every handshake just reinforced his story of being this brilliant, influential man who should be admired.
Okay, so a powerful network, that's one pillar holding up Epstein's narrative. But it wasn't enough on its own. See, a powerful story needs a system to protect it when it gets challenged. And in this case, the legal system, well, it failed spectacularly. So let's move to that second pillar, a system completely void of integrity.
As one legal journal puts it so powerfully, this isn't about bad men. It's about a system that is void of integrity. And that just hits the nail on the head. The problem wasn't just one man's awful actions. It was a total failure of the very system that's supposed to give us justice. It's a hard look at how integrity just crumbles when that much power and influence are involved. This slide just lays it out in black and white, the difference between how the system is supposed to work and how it worked for Epstein. For most people, the legal system is terrifying. For Epstein, it was a negotiation.
His process was so ridiculously lenient, it was literally called the sweetheart deal of the century. His own lawyers were basically telling the prosecution what the deal was going to be. The whole thing was completely backward, a perfect example of a two-tiered system of justice.
So, how do we wrap our heads around how a powerful network and a broken system can work together to trap people? It's really hard to see the whole picture when you're just looking at one piece at a time. But what if I told you a simple analogy could make it all click? Make it all perfectly clear.
A philosopher named Marilyn Frye came up with this brilliant definition of oppression. She says it's not like hitting one single massive wall. No, it's more like being caught in a web of forces and barriers that are all connected, and they work together to hold you in place, to stop you from moving. Think of it like a spider's web, right? One single thread is easy to break, but when you're caught in the whole thing, it feels almost impossible to get out. And this is where she brings in this incredible analogy of a bird cage. So picture this. You're looking at a bird in a cage, but you're standing so close, all you can see is one single wire. Just one. And you'd think, well, that's easy. Why doesn't the bird just, fly around it? It seems like such an obvious solution, but that's because we're only seeing one piece of the puzzle. It's only when you take a step back, when you see the entire cage, and you see how all those individual wires connect and lock together, that's when you understand. The bird isn't being lazy or stupid. The bird is truly, systematically trapped. There is literally no direction it can fly without hitting another wire. It's a heartbreaking thought, but it's so important to see it that way. And in this case, the wires of Epstein's cage are crystal clear. The powerful social network? That's one wire, isolating victims and making him seem untouchable. The broken legal system? That's another wire, giving him loopholes and that sweetheart deal. The media story that painted him as a genius? A third wire, shaping what everyone thought of him. His huge fortune? Wire number 4, paying for his network and his lawyers. And finally, the social stigma that makes us doubt victims. That was a fifth wire, silencing them with shame. Any single wire might seem possible to get around, but together, they formed a cage that was nearly impossible to escape.
Now, this birdcage analogy, it's a really powerful way to understand how systems can silence people. But it's not just a story of despair. And this is crucial. It also points us to the way out. It shows us where the real power to take the cage apart actually is.
So, here it is. This is the key. While the power structures work overtime to keep all these stories separate, to keep them isolated, those stories become incredibly powerful when they're connected. When hundreds of people start telling the same story, you stop seeing them as individual, maybe questionable accounts. You start seeing the bars of the cage. You see the system itself. And once you can see the system, you can start to take it down.
In the end, the most powerful weapon against a false narrative is the survivor's own story. That's a truth that can't be bought, can't be permanently silenced, and can't be erased by a bunch of powerful friends. As one survivor said so powerfully, her story is his life sentence, and sometimes that's all the justice a survivor gets. It's the simple, profound act of taking back what was stolen.
And that really leaves us with a final and, I think, vital question to carry with you. See, the systems that build these cages, they depend on our silence. They count on us looking away. But when we make a choice, a conscious choice, to listen, to believe people, and to see how all these stories connect, well, then we're refusing to be a part of that cage building. We actually become a force for taking it apart, piece by piece, story by story. So the real question is for all of us. When we choose not to listen, whose cage are we helping to build?